So, welcome to Plodcast, episode 75. Good to have you here. Thanks for coming along. Most of you are probably riding in your car. Hope you don't mind if I hop in the back seat and have a little visit, right? So, one of the things I do, keeping myself current, keeping myself abreast, is I subscribe to a number of magazines. And my routine is I let the magazines accumulate, and when I have a stack of them that's sitting there in my study at home on a Saturday, I will just sit down and take the stack and work through all the magazines at one go. That's how it usually happens. And I subscribe to various magazines. I won't list them all, but let me just give you a few of the political magazines that I subscribe to. I subscribe to National Review. I subscribe to Chronicles. I subscribe to the Weekly Standard, Citizen, for example. And the reason I'm bringing this topic up is the Weekly Standard is one of them that I subscribe to. And as you may have seen in the news, the Weekly Standard, founded by Fred Barnes and Bill Kristol, is shuttering is being shuttered, I think, by the end of the year. So the Weekly Standard is no more. And I want to talk a little bit about this. Now, the president, for example, did a little catcalling when the Weekly Standard folded. Bill Kristol is probably you might regard him as the prince of the never-Trumpers. So he was a conservative spokesman who couldn't abide Donald Trump and just was never Trump and stayed never Trump and got never Trumpier. So and for many people who are the people who are on the Trump train and have sort of asked Donald Trump into their heart to be their personal savior, there's a level of dedication there on the one end, and then there's the people who are diametrically opposed to Trump and all that he stands for, and because they say, like Bill Kristol would say, Donald Trump has betrayed conservatism, and there are a number of sound arguments to back that up. But the thing that's striking is how personalities get into this, because I've seen some very real very real instances of people abandoning their conservative principles, and I've seen it with some people on the Trump train. All of a sudden, they don't care about free markets anymore. You know, they don't care about that anymore. But I've also seen an abandonment of conservative principles just as striking on the never Trump end of things. So when I look at some of the things that Bill Kristol has said, some of the things that David French has put out, or some of the things that Max Boot is doing, it's possible to go. There's, as I'm fond of saying, there's a ditch on both sides of the road, and you can drive into that ditch on both sides of the road. Now, if out of the political magazines that I've mentioned, Chronicles, National Review I've subscribed to since I was in high school, so decades and decades. I just have National Review and I are just good friends, regardless of what they're talking. You know, I just like National Review. But out of these magazines, my position is probably closer to the editorial policy of Chronicles than any of the other magazines that I subscribe to. But I'd read the Weekly Standard, which is supposed to be this neocon compromise thing, and there were a lot of things about it that I thought were admirable and fun, and I would read the Weekly Standard and enjoy it, and I would read National Review, and I would enjoy it, and I would read Chronicles and enjoy it, and so on. Now, the thing that I don't really get is how political differences like this can be turned into the battle between light and darkness, between the good principalities and powers and the evil principalities and powers. Now, of course, on some political issues, let's say same-sex marriage or the abortion carnage, those sorts of things really are issues of the battle between light and dark. But trade policy, immigration policy. So I've got certain strong views, developed views, the views that I've thought through on immigration policy and what I think our trade policy ought to be, and so on. But I can easily envision someone disagreeing with me on matters like that, and have that other person not be an orc, not be one of the minions of Sauron, right? So, so I get these magazines and I read them and I say, okay, my center of gravity is probably closest to Chronicles here, not the National Review. I differ with this and that and the other, but I really appreciate these things about National Review, and I really appreciate these things about the Weekly Standard. And then I look at my Twitter feed and find people pouring vitriol on one another over issues that they ought not to be, they shouldn't be doing that. So with the Weekly Standard, my understanding is that the investors or the backers or the financial supporters pulled the plug on it, and it was because of the unrelenting "Never Trump" line. I don't think the problem was that they had Never Trump people there, or that was the position they held, but that it had gotten so personal. So it's a shame. Looks like I'm going to have one less magazine in my stack to be working through. And although I am a paleocon, I'm not a neocon like Weekly Standard. I'm a paleocon. I'm an old guy. I tell people in my politics I'm slightly to the left of King Arthur. So it'd be hard to find a magazine that would be exactly up my alley. But there it is. Let's call good and evil those things that really are issues of good and evil, and let's not get all spun tight over things that are just a matter of sound policy or prudence. So my book review section for Plodcast episode 75 is Ship of Fools by Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson has a Fox News talk show. And he's got this book out, Ship of Fools, and it's about how America's elites have basically betrayed the country. Now, it's interesting. As I picked this book by Tucker Carlson, let me hearken back earlier in this podcast. I was talking about the Weekly Standard. One of the things that Bill Kristol did, I think, that helped stick a fork in the Weekly Standard, is that he just winged off and accused Tucker Carlson, who is more conservative than Kristol is, and not. Although Tucker Carlson's not a big fan of the president, he's closer to some of the president's views on immigration and whatnot than Bill Kristol would be, and without any evidence or backing or substantiation at all, Kristol accused Tucker Carlson of supporting slavery. That you're a fan of slavery. That's the kind of personal vindictiveness, personal vitriol that I think got the plug pulled on the Weekly Standard. It was not so much the editorial position as the vigor and enthusiasm and acid that was involved in some of the debates. Well, anyway, Tucker Carlson was a player in this, and in this book, Ship of Fools, he tackles a number of different political issues, and shows how basically America's ruling elites are asleep at the switch. They're not doing their job. They're not being held accountable as they fail to do their job. And he gets into a little bit, well, not just a little bit. It's a very good book for evaluating how on earth someone like Donald Trump could be elected president of the United States. And he has a line early in the book which says this. He said, happy nations don't elect Donald Trump as their president. He said, desperate nations do. And I thought that was profound. This was not a bunch of people so thrilled with how their lives are going, so thrilled with how the economy's going, so thrilled with how everything is going that they said, and I'm so happy I'm going to vote for someone who represents my values. No, Donald Trump was very much a reaction, a blowback, a Hail Mary pass on the part of forgotten Americans. So people who have felt despised, neglected, rejected, looked down on, all the inhabitants of flyover country in that part in between New York and L.A. Had gotten to the point of desperation, and Tucker put his finger on it when he said, "Happy nations don't elect Donald Trump president. Desperate nations do." And he goes through and shows how, and this lines up. Actually, I'm reading various books that line up with this. I've referred. I reviewed earlier a book by Kurt Schlichter called Militant Normals. He's making the same argument. And a few years ago, I read a book by a guy named Codevilla called The Ruling Class, which I just got out again to read through again, because what it boils down to is every society is ruled by elites. Every society is ruled by people who know where the levers under the desk are. They know who to talk to. They know the phone number of the Kremlin they can call and avert a war. You've got people who know what the game is. It's not possible to have a society of any complexity, whatever, anything bigger than a village, is going to require some level of specialization, some level of expertise. You're going to have some aristocratic group running the show. But what happens, and this is something that Tucker Carlson points out, Schlichter hits on this as well, what happens when you have a ruling elite? What happens when you have an aristocracy that takes all the perks of being an aristocrat, but exhibits none of the competence? Where the Greek word for best is aristos. Aristocracy is the rule of the best. So what happens when the aristocrats, the best who are ruling you, are actually the worst? What happens when they don't know that something can cost, who don't know that you can't make money if you require people to sell something for less than what it costs to produce, or if they don't know the difference between a boy and a girl? That's not the rule of the best anymore. It's not an aristocracy. It's rule by the incompetent. If you want example after example after example in many different areas, whether it has to do with climate change or immigration or whatever it has to do with, this book is it's a quick read. You can get through it fairly simply. Tucker writes engagingly. I recommend it. So continuing on with Plodcast episode 75, we come to our hamartiology section. This section today won't be very long. A word for excess, Anachusis, is used once in the New Testament, and that's in 1 Peter 4:4. This is the word for excess, Anachusis. The Apostle Peter refers to the lives of unbelieving Gentiles who are given over to lust, drunkenness, revelings, parties, and living this way in excess of riot. And living in this excess of riot, Anachusis, they believe that living moderately is just plain strange. And Peter describes it. If you're not out with them on a bender, if you don't in the evening throwing up in the bushes, there's something wrong with you. So to illustrate this, I'll hearken back to my Navy days. I remember that there was a machinist mate. I would tell you his name because I still vividly remember his name, but it's such a distinctive name that he's probably soundly converted and living a modest and clean Christian life now. So I won't tell you his name. But he was a machinist mate on the submarine that I was on, and I remember he came in one morning after a real a bender. He'd been out on the town the night before, and so I greeted him cheerfully as he came into the crew's mess, and I said, "Hey," call him by his name, "Did you have a good time last night?" And he was bleary-eyed, still a little bit pie-faced, and I said, "Did you have a good time?" And he said, "I must have. I don't have any money." So for all he knew, he had been knocked over the head and robbed, and that was his measuring stick for whether or not he had a good time, whether or not there was any money in his wallet. So for these people, living reasonable is the most unreasonable thing in the world. All right, living reasonably is the most unreasonable thing in the world.
God in the time of the sickness, God in the doctor too.
You've spent a pleasant half hour with Plodcast proprietor Douglas Wilson. This podcast is produced by Canon Press. Please take a moment to subscribe to the Plodcast on your favorite listening platform. To hear more from Doug, please visit canonpress.com.